So we want to talk today through this lens, and maybe you can speak to that a little bit, Antonia. How can understanding the type of ENTP you are, the flavor of ENTP that you are, how can that help influence your career trajectory?
Well, I think what's so interesting about the work that Dario's done, and if you want to understand more about how subtypes work, we recorded an entire podcast with Dario when he came and stayed with us, and he discussed what that means. What are 4 different subtypes? Where does that come from? What is the information based on? And just as a really quick cliff notes, it was something that emerged while he was observing people of the same personality type through EEG scans, that they had slightly different mind wiring, even if they were clustered in the same type. And so a pattern started to emerge that there were 4 different styles of wiring that were associated with these different types. And there was a pattern to that, meaning that there are 4 different subtypes that you're going to see in every single type. And so that alters, or that kind of explains why not every ENTP looks like every other ENTP. And in fact, it's always been my pet peeve when people run around and tell you you're not the type that you identify with because you don't show up in this, like, and then they'll like explain this very, very narrow set of character traits that are not common to every ENTP. They're just common to a certain kind or style.
Yeah.
And once I read the subtype descriptions, I went, oh, that person has this subtype of ENTP as their prototype in their mind, and they're completely missing the 75% of other, or at least the 3 other subtypes of ENTPs.
Yeah.
That happens over and over and over. And it happens for all types, by the way. It's very common for people to accuse each other of not being their best fit type. Sometimes they're accurate. Sometimes that person isn't that best fit type. But more often than not, it's just that they're a subtype that individual is unaware of even existing. So the point of all of that is these subtypes are very influential in a lot of different, not just how we show up, not just our character traits, but the decisions we make, the kinds of things that are in alignment with us, including our career choices.
Yeah.
And I think it's also really important to understand this piece, this sort of burgeoning awareness of how type works, particularly with brain scan technology, because there's also a component that this is more of a nurture, sort of a nurture influence on type rather than just nature. And what I mean by that is that there's some information that indicates that type is inborn. We come pre-wired with certain preferences. And they've just about nailed this down with introversion and extroversion. But the other preferences, it's hard to measure these things, but it does seem to be that we show up with this, this way of looking at the world. But how we're going to manifest these into character traits, not to our mind wiring, not to the thing that's intrinsic to us, but the traits that we bring to the world, that's way more nurture oriented. That's way more about our experiences and our environment and how we've had to show up and respond to our environment and survival and all of that. And so the subtypes are more oriented towards nurture, which means that the subtypes can change. Your type doesn't seem to change. There's a lot of influence that indicates that if you're born with ENFP preferences like you are, Joel, you're going to stay in ENFP. If I'm born with ENTP preferences, I'm going to stay in ENTP. But the subtype of ENTP I am, that fluxes and flows through my life depending upon my circumstances. So when we talk about type and careers, we're not just talking about career choices that would be good for our personality type and our subtype. We're also talking about a choice that's going to mold how my subtype looks.
Yeah.
Because we spend so much time in our careers, 40 plus hours a week, that's an environment we put ourselves in that we have to respond and react to. We have to solve certain problems. We have to engage and interact with certain kinds of hierarchies. And so it's a choice we're making not just to match who we are now, but it's a choice we're making of what kind of person we want to be molded into in the future with this career choice. So I think it's really important.
I think it's very important if you're an ENTP listening. I think you're going to get a lot of clarity on maybe the subtype that you identify with. Before we go down that rabbit hole, though, into the deeper stuff, I did my internet research, Antonia. According to the internets, here are the top 10 list for ENTPs as far as career choices. You ready? Now you're an ENTP. You tell me if these resonate.
Okay.
Tell me how many of these you would do, or you'd be like, what?
Or how many I have done.
Or how many you have done. And the other thing is too, I think, you're using a cognitive function, a dominant cognitive function of extroverted intuition, exploration, we call it. It has a lot of interest in a lot of different subjects.
Indeed.
So it could be all over the map. Here's the top 10 list. This is just internet research quickly, just to get a sense. Number 1, entrepreneur. So for ENTPs and their careers, here's the top 10 list on the internet. Number 1, entrepreneur. Number 2, lawyer. 3, marketing manager. Number 4, salesperson. 5, consultant. 6, public relations specialist. 7, real estate agent or broker. 8, journalist. That's your favorite one, Antonia. Number 9, architect. And number 10, engineer. This is what this is a general list, right? It's not comprehensive or peer reviewed or anything.
Yeah. Well, some of those also require some specialized training to become. But of that list, I would say that I have either done that or worked in an office where that was the thing that was being done. I would say probably 7 out of 10 of those.
Wow. Like the lawyer, you worked in a law office, but you weren't a lawyer yourself, as an example.
Yep.
All right. So as you look at that list and you're listening along right now, do those identify with you? Maybe you're doing one of those, maybe you're not doing one of those quote unquote top 10 best careers for ENTPs. I think it's hard to make a list like that fits all ENTPs. So we go into this idea of subtypes now. Mm-hmm. There's 4 subtypes:
right,
dominant, creative, normalizing, and harmonizing. They're connected to Dr. Dario Nardi's work. Basically, he brought ENTPs into his lab. He connected EEG machines to their brain. He'd ask them a series of questions, and he'd watch the pattern of the brain, like brain scans, like how the scans would look. He would notice patterns, and he started to see a grouping of 4 subtypes of ENTPs. And then he also wove in some of Dr. Helen Fisher's work to notice that neurotransmitters mapped to these as well. So there's a pattern to this chemically in our brains as well, like testosterone, dopamine, serotonin, and estrogen also help us identify which one we might lean more toward. So that's the basics. Let's walk down into these now, and let's talk about each one of these in specificity. So you as an ENTP listening along, as you listen to this, you might understand, oh, well, no wonder I have an aptitude for that career. No wonder I'm not interested in that career that the internet says I should be interested in. Mm-hmm. I'm this style of ENTP.
Yeah.
And the other final thing to say is, just like Antonia said at the beginning, this isn't a type. These aren't types of ENTPs. You are an ENTP, an ENTP, an ENTP. Like that's how you identify. That's how your cognition is wired. This is how you express that. So it can change. Your career can influence it, and you can influence which career you go toward. So not only will the type of subtype you are influence the career you choose as an ENTP, but the style of career you choose will also influence which style of ENTP you are as well.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a couple of things I want to add. First, if the phrase or the subtypes dominant, creative, normalizing, and harmonizing sound familiar, Dario borrowed these terms from Dr. Victor Galenko, who's done a lot of research in socionics, which is almost like sort of the Russian version of Myers-Briggs. Mm-hmm. And he borrowed those terms with permission from Victor. And the other thing I wanted to say is that up until the age of 25 years old, the most influential thing or facet on our type or how our type shows up is gender. After 25, it's career choice. And so if you are 25 years old or older, then we really like it. It's very influential. The career you go into, or maybe even the series of careers you go into, because we are talking about people with ENTP preferences. Yeah. So the reason why I said, I've done at least like 7 out of 10 of those, or at least been working in an environment that was the focus. I don't think it's uncommon for people with ENTP preferences to job hop a lot, right? To go from job to job to job. And that's one of the big challenges. It's one of the reasons why they're like, okay, what is the career I should finally land in? Because if you keep job hopping, now your resume might have a lot of variety on it, but it's hard to express expertise. It's hard to say, I'm really good at this one thing. And having a wide variety of jobs, I would think that would be a good thing, but it actually usually isn't. It looks like you're unpredictable. It looks like you don't really have a focus. And so being able to narrow it down and not just go from career to career to career. I mean, a career is something you've chosen. Jobs are things that you're just doing. A career is a path. So what path should I be choosing can be a little stressful for people with ENTP preferences, because just the idea of nailing something down and just choosing one thing all by itself can be something that feels binding.
Well, and I would also argue that ENTPs, they will attempt a career or a job that maybe they're unqualified for, but it's very difficult for an ENTP to go towards something they don't feel competent around. Like they want to feel competent when they do something. So sometimes it can hold back an ENTP that wants to do something if they feel like they're going to be silly or look dumb, or they don't have enough information or training or specialization in that. That can alter the type of career they choose.
Well, on the flip side, I think that they can also, I mean, some ENTPs can talk themselves into jobs that they're wildly unqualified for.
No, don't say that's true.
And just assume that they'll figure it out as they go. And it's not uncommon for somebody with ENTP preferences to actually succeed in doing that.
Yeah.
Only to find that once the thrill of having figured everything out, right, all the things that they were like stressing out to learn because they talked themselves into this thing.
That 6-month mark hits.
At the 6-month mark, they're like, oh, this is boring too.
Yeah. Oh, shoot.
So sometimes there's the thrill of the kill.
Yeah.
Of getting a job that you're like, I want to see if I can just get it. And you do. And you're like, oh, now I have to hustle and figure all these things out. And that was providing a bunch of like interesting adrenaline.
Yeah.
But once that's complete, you're like, this is just like every other job.
Yeah.
Right. It's just now once I figure it out, now it's set it and forget it. And I don't want that. I want something that's constantly challenging. So another part of the career path is finding something that will suit an ENTP's desire to be constantly challenged.
Keep learning.
Yeah.
Keep growing. Let's get into these subtypes.